Club. Thanks for helping me with my school project. I've chosen 5 things that I think we should read in the next coming months. And I'm just going to start in. The very first one is The Ocean at the End of the Lane by Neil Gaiman. Neil Gaiman is sort of an artist of mythology and fairy tale. He wrote Stardust, if you're familiar with, if you saw the movie or you read that book. And Ocean at the End of the Lane is a nice quick read. We might want to choose it for maybe November when we're getting really busy for Christmas. Don't take the boy, said old Mrs. Hemstock. Asking for trouble, that is. I was disappointed. We'll be fine, said Letty. I'll take care of him and me. It'll be an adventure. And he'll be company. Please, Gran? I looked up at old Mrs. Hemstock with hope on my face and waited. Don't say I didn't warn you if it all goes wobbly, said old Mrs. Hemstock. Thank you, Gran. I won't, and I'll be careful. Old Mrs. Hemstock sniffed. Now don't do anything stupid. Approach it with care. Bind it. Close its ways. And send it back to sleep. I know, said Letty. I know all that. Honestly, we'll be fine. That's what she said, but we weren't. A man comes home for a funeral in his hometown. He can't quite put the pieces of his childhood back together. And he ends up walking to an old house. The woman inside looks exactly the same as she did 40 years ago when he was a child here. And this sort of eerie sense of foreboding starts creeping over the whole novel. And then you're on this fabulous, mythological, good against evil incarnate ride. I really think it would be a great read for us. Quick and fun. A page turner, when we might like a page turner. My next choice is decidedly more cerebral than that. It's called Ex Libris by Anne Fadiman. Confessions of a Common Reader. So Anne Fadiman grew up in a very literary household. I think her dad was, a famous professor, maybe in Harvard, or I've sort of forgotten. But she talks about just the joys of reading and why she reads and what a book feels like and why it matters where your books are on a bookshelf. She talks about lying in bed reading next to her husband, and while she is immersed in anything that has to do with the Arctic or snow or the discovery of the poles or the endeavor, she just loves it. It feeds her soul. Meanwhile, her husband is lying next to her reading about the hottest of jungles, dripping, dangerous, creepy, hot. And why that is, why someone will choose this kind of reading over that kind of reading, and how all of it is joyful no matter what. It's also a memoir of her family it's an interesting family, so we might want to do that one. I have lately taken to reading some nonfiction, and this latest nonfiction, The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks by Rebecca Skloot, is this astonishing story. Imagine if someone you loved, their cells were taken from them for study, and then this someone that you loved died. But the cells were taken without her consent or that of the rest of her family, and they grew and survived and did really, really well. This is what happened to Henrietta Lacks. These HeLa cells, they're called HeLa from the first 2 letters of her first name and the first 2 letters of her last name, HeLa, Henrietta Lacks, were taken from her in 1951. Her family wasn't told, she wasn't told, nobody gave consent, and they have never received any sort of reparation for this. Meanwhile, these cells have grown and grown and grown, and they would weigh, if you put them all together, over the years, they would weigh billions of pounds. I mean, it's just millions and billions and trillions and gajillions of cells have reproduced just because they lasted so well, and they still don't really understand why. But they were so hardy, they could be sent through the mail way back in the 50s, long before we had, when it absolutely positively had to be there overnight. They're stable, and they have contributed to so many medical miracles. Polio vaccine, better cancer treatments, just a raft of things. Meanwhile, this author, Rebecca Skloot, asks, who was she? Who was her family? What happened to them? And where are they now? It reads like a murder mystery reads. And I think we would really have a great discussion after reading that one. Another nonfiction book that I really loved, I admit I was listening to it, is by Malcolm Gladwell. He wrote Blink and The Tipping Point, if you've read either of those. This one's called Outliers, The Story of Success. And it's just fascinating. He starts out with hockey players in Canada, the best hockey players in the world, in the best country for hockey in the world. And he talks about how when you look at a roster for hockey players, really great hockey players, almost all of their birthdays lie in January, February, and March. So it might not be intuitive to you as to why that would be. But it turns out the cutoff for hockey is January 1st. And the tryouts for hockey are November, December. So when a child is 6, almost 7, and they're trying out for the next league of hockey, the 6, almost 7-year-old whose birthday was in January is competing against maybe the 7-year-old whose birthday was in October or November. So he's just 7. We all know the difference between, a 6-year-old and a 7-year-old is really quite remarkable. And that almost year of development and size plays into who gets chosen for the next best team so that they get better coaching and they get more time playing. He talks a lot about the 10,000 hours rule and why 10,000 hours of practice makes you an expert. He thinks he answers the question of why Asians are good in math, and also why Bill Gates, Bill Joy, who pretty much wrote most of the code for the internet, and Steve Jobs were all crack shot, amazing people in their field. It sort of gets you thinking about success and how we think about it and why how we think about it is wrong. One of my very favorites of all time, it's The Shipping News by Annie Proulx. I have a hard time talking about this book because it's so marvelous. When you enter a book, you're going to enter it through its characters or its setting or its storyline or its language. And many books will have one or two of those elements, but when you get all 4 of those elements together, it's a masterwork. The Shipping News starts out, we're introduced to our protagonist, Coil, whose name resembles coil like a coil of rope. A coil of rope on a ship is something that is left over, piece of the rope that it's okay to walk on. And that's how this character has been through his life. I'm going to start by reading a quick description of Coil that has stayed with me for almost 20 years. A great damp loaf of a body. At 6, he weighed 80 pounds. At 16, he was buried under a casement of flesh. Head shaped like a Crenshaw, no neck, reddish hair ruched back. Features as bunched as kissed fingertips. Eyes the color of plastic. The monstrous chin, a freakish shelf jutting from the lower face. Annie Proulx sets the stage in Newfoundland. You can feel the cold. you can smell the sea air in her descriptions. The Atlantic Ocean is almost a character in the book that could bring bounty or destruction. There are epigraphs at the beginning of every chapter that will have you dreaming of knots. She'll talk about a particular knot and how it's tied. And then she will say something like, and it goes over and under. Tie it wrong and you have a different knot, or no knot at all. So all those truths that we learn in fiction, Annie Proulx has painted for us. In addition to that, it's just a great sweeping epic novel of a family and a fabulous love story that just pours itself into you slowly and believably. The Shipping News is one of those books that just hangs with you. You'll think about it and think about it and think about it for years to come. One of the things I do want to say about it is I've known people that have picked up this book and they don't get into it right away. But you have to allow yourself the time to invest in this book. It's worth it. Allow it to seep into you, and then it will live with you the rest of your life. I think The Shipping News has the very best last line possibly in all of literature. I don't know how we can't read this for book club, actually. So I hope that you'll allow us to pick it. Thanks for helping me with my project. I hope that we will choose some of these. Once again, it's The Ocean at the End of the Lane, Ex Libris, The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks, Outliers, and The Shipping News by Annie Proulx. Thanks so much. Love you all. Bye.